Hey Unwrappers, Ollie here. Before we start, I'd just like to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Readly, the digital subscription service for newspapers and magazines, available on your smartphone, tablet or desktop. Readly offers unlimited reading from more than 6,000 titles, from newspapers like The Guardian and The Independent to current affairs titles like Forbes, Newsweek and Wired. And if you're after something a little lighter, you can also read up on your favourite hobbies such as film, music, food, DIY, cars and many more, with magazines ranging from T3 and the Radio Times to Vogue. You can share your subscription too on up to 5 devices and download your choice of magazines to read anytime you like. And listeners of The Week Unwrapped can get an exclusive 2-month free trial. Just go to readly.com/theweek. That's readly.com/THEWEEK. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday, the 17th of December, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the largest nursing strike in NHS history. Sam Bankman-Fried, boss of failed cryptocurrency exchange FTX, charged with defrauding investors. And after a wait of 13 years, James Cameron's Avatar sequel released in cinemas. You can read more about all of that in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Sorcha Bradley. From the Week magazine, it's Leaf Arbuthnot, and from podcast Today in History with the Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. And Arion, as an Aussie hiding in plain sight amongst us, did you pretend to care about England exiting the World Cup this week?
Do you know, I actually did care about that because I think you sort of take on teams as yours gets, removed from competition and, with increasing levels of kind of peripherality about your connection to them. So, no, I was concerned.
I guess in the football, you're unlikely to ever face an England versus Australia clash of any significance, aren't you?
That's true. Although we have done sort of strangely well in friendlies.
He still said we about Australia. Leaf, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The dismantling of zero COVID.
Now, this is the same app that tracked people's movement using mobile phone signals. It identified people in high-risk areas and controlled their travel out of the region. The mobile app has been at the center of China's zero-COVID strategy and has also been a guiding factor in Beijing's pandemic response.
South Asian news channel WEON reporting Monday. Leaf, what's the story?
So on Tuesday, China disabled this app that has been used for 3 years since the kind of breakout of COVID to basically follow its citizens as they go from a potentially high-risk COVID area, out. And it's part of a bigger story that's happened since last week, where China is basically trying to disable this policy that's ruled over the country since, the pandemic began, where it's trying to completely suppress the virus. And now it's basically a total handbrake turn to a new kind of approach to the disease.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a handbrake turn, isn't it? It's not just about this app, which was the itinerary card app. It's the entire process by which China was monitoring COVID and their policy of basically not even just stay at home, but if you've got COVID, go to special state-run facilities. All of that's been reversed back on in the quickest kind of pivot, really, that any nation's done in response to the pandemic.
Exactly. And it's funny, in the Western media, which obviously at the Week we kind of spend all of our time poring over, before this change of policy, there was a kind of real braying for this policy to change. And now that the policy actually has changed, everyone's going, oh God, China, look at what's coming. It's going to be terrible. You guys don't have as many, hospital beds as you'd like, and good luck to you, essentially. And I find it fascinating seeing all the clips from the reporting on the kind of dismantling of zero COVID, because it's a bit like stepping back in time, seeing people with their masks on, empty shelves as everyone in, Beijing is trying to stock up on medicines and kind of traditional Chinese medicines as well. The hope is that we'll see what happens, but this being China, we might never have a true sense of the impact of this sudden reversal of the policy.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Sorcha? Because, if you asked a lot of people internationally who in the long run has been handling COVID the best, quite a few people would have said China for most of the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of how well they have kept their numbers relatively low, although as we've seen, the zero COVID policy hasn't been as successful as China would have liked. And despite the severe restrictions, at the end of November, they were recording their highest ever level of cases. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that these sorts of really severe restrictions are necessarily the best way forward. And obviously now China is potentially facing huge issues as it prepares to open up. Very few people have been vaccinated, particularly the elderly population. So that's one particular area that could cause huge problems then for China's healthcare system. It really doesn't have enough capacity to deal with potentially the number of people that they could be seeing in ICU beds. So yes, they've kept their numbers relatively low, but as we might see in the coming weeks, they could now be dealing with this huge crisis as the virus just rips through the country.
And what about this app then, Arion? How did it work and how might it change things now it's been discontinued?
So the idea was that with this app, people could show that they hadn't been in contact with anyone with a case, and that would grant them access to shopping malls or on public transport, as long as they themselves had had a recent negative test and also they hadn't been in contact with anyone else. They could also, in some parts of the country, that same app would allow them to enter parks and supermarkets without further checks. So it really facilitated kind of the day-to-day activity of your average person. But it should be noted as well that it's a bit of a symbolic move having turned this app off, because there are still these local apps in use across cities all around the country.
What? Citizens in China being monitored by the government through a variety of different means?
Yeah, exactly. I know, shocking as it is. But still, it's indicative of the shift in policy direction, and with some of the things like you mentioned, the fact that people can now isolate at home rather than in state facilities, and also this really broad relaxation of mass testing. You're seeing a stepping away from this zero COVID strategy towards, well, I suppose what the people wanted. And I think that has been the thing that has been so profound, has been this sort of wave of protest that preceded the change of direction from the government, which at first was in response to, well, I suppose, first of all, people's great fatigue in having to live in this very, very repressive situation for so long. But also there was a fire in Western Xinjiang where 10 people died, and the feeling was that the kind of restrictions were responsible, at least partially, for having hampered the rescue effort. And, people were very, very outraged to see deaths literally caused in this very literal way by people having not been able to get into the building to help. So that level of protest and the impact that it had, obviously, on the government is at least partially responsible for this change of direction.
But all of those policies were in place, Leaf, to try and prevent lots of people dying. I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it? And does this mean that we're going to see a lot of people dying as a result of them relaxing these regulations?
I think we'll have to see what happens. I think it's inevitable that lots of people will die, but it's just the question of whether that is vastly more than we saw in the West or not. And obviously, the Omicron variant, which is really partly responsible for this kind of relaxation because it's so much more contagious than the original COVID that we saw, in March 2020, spreads very easily, but is also a little bit less deadly. I mean, as Sorcha said, that the kind of vaccination rates are not exactly where you'd like them to be in China, especially amongst older people. I think there's a real lack of people having had recent boosters as well. But, Beijing is saying already that there were 22,000 people at its sort of fever clinics on Sunday last week, which was 16 times the number a week before. So there's already signs that this thing is kind of getting out of control. An interesting element of this was that in a kind of television broadcast about the kind of relaxation of this policy, that a Chinese health authority person really emphasized, was kind of bigging up how people should be more relaxed. And he was saying everyone should treat it with a normal heart. There's no need to be nervous or even fearful. So I think it's going to be a psychological challenge as well for a lot of Chinese people who have been living in fear of this thing and also feeling quite smug about how well China is dealing with it by comparison with other countries. And now suddenly it's like, they've just let the horses bolt. And so I think one thing that might happen is that because people in China have been quite frightened of it, maybe there'll be a lot of self kind of regulation of this, and the streets and shops and restaurants will stay pretty empty for a long time.
And before we get too smug, Sorcha, people can say about China, oh, they're no longer going to know how many people have COVID. This is just going to let rip through the country because they can't monitor it properly anymore. But we don't know how many people have COVID in the UK or in Europe or in the US, do we? We don't have an accurate figure on that because a lot of people don't do tests. When they do tests, they don't send the results in. The figures aren't being presented to us on the news anymore like they were. We've no idea how serious COVID is, really. We only have an impact on hospital numbers. That's the only measure we have.
Yeah, I think there is an element to which us in the West are sort of starting to look at COVID as if it's totally over, as if it's something that we don't need to worry about. I think at the moment we're probably being helped by the fact that the current mutation of COVID that's going around doesn't seem to be particularly deadly. And that's something that could help China as well. That maybe, although potentially billions of people could get infected in China, they could be helped by the fact that it's a less deadly version of the virus. But I think, the concern is in China that when you have a country of so many people having no idea about the kind of numbers circulating, potentially that leads us into a sticky situation, not just in China, but globally as well. We don't want to see kind of the reignition of the pandemic. And I think people are sort of looking at China and worrying because of the sheer numbers of people who are there, that is something that could happen.
But I mean, what about the vaccine itself that they have in China? Because that's something that people here maybe aren't as aware of, Arion. And when you do read about it, there is a smugness in Western coverage that the Chinese vaccine isn't as good. I don't really understand. I mean, I thought, by this point, it should be a meritocratic decision. Like, which scientists have produced the best vaccines? Let's make billions of those.
Well, yes, except that, national pride is bound up in the question. And the simple truth is that, as you say, China's vaccines just haven't been as successful as the ones developed, particularly by Moderna and Pfizer in the West. And so there is this issue of China not wanting to almost admit defeat on that front. And they've actively requested, rather than being sent a whole lot of jabs, they want the technology so that they can develop their own jabs. But I think that even that is problematic because it takes such a long time, even once you have the technology, to kind of ramp up the production of the vaccine, that their problem is in the immediate term. It's happening right now. And so for them to ask for that, you can see in a way why they want it, but also perhaps with a kind of history of not terribly savory practices towards intellectual property of other countries, you can see the reticence of those countries themselves in even providing it. So it's a vexed question, however you come at it. But I think that the simplest and probably even the cheapest thing would be for them to just buy up an international vaccine, especially when you think of something like AstraZeneca, which is pretty much being given away for free. That is itself better than the one that they've got on offer internally.
What do you think is going to happen next, Leaf? I mean, you've chosen this as your story of the week. Do you think the app will get reinstated as COVID actually ends up going between these millions of people? Or do you think this is a significant change in something like people power? They wanted this to end and it has in China?
I would imagine that there won't be another turnaround because it feels like it was such a big deal for Xi Jinping, who it's worth saying is trying to sort of distance himself from this decision. He's been abroad and not been kind of, at the kind of front face of this change of policy. I think it would be a bit of an embarrassment for him to do a sort of double U-turn. And so I think that whatever happens, we will probably never have a very, very clear idea of the impact of this change. But I'm just, I'm really hoping that, as you say, that this doesn't provide the kind of breeding ground of a new, really super, super contagious virus that then comes to bite the West. But that B, lots of people, don't die of it because it's a, terrible illness, as we've all seen.
Mm. Okay, Arion, I'm coming to you next after this. Hey Unwrappers, Ollie here. I'd just like to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Readly, the digital subscription service for newspapers and magazines available on your smartphone, tablet or desktop. Readly offers unlimited reading from more than 6,000 titles, from newspapers like The Guardian and The Independent to current affairs titles like Forbes, Newsweek and Wired. And if you're after something a little lighter, you can also read up on your favourite hobbies such as film, music, food, DIY, cars and many more, with magazines ranging from T3 and the Radio Times to Vogue. You can share your subscription too on up to 5 devices and download your choice of magazines to read anytime you like. And listeners of The Week Unwrapped can get an exclusive 2-month free trial. Just go to readly.com/theweek. That's readly.com/THEWEEK. Okay, Arion, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, the K-pop band BTS's supporters, who are known as the Army, watched as their heroes joined their ranks.
First, many are wondering what's in store for Jin with his mandatory military service. Can you walk us through what it's probably going to be like for him, at least for the basics training?
Basic training in the Korean military will last for 6 weeks. So this week and next week, it'll be basically for him to get a very simplified physical checkup, changing into uniform, packing his old civilian stuff to back home, things of that nature. He'll also get a attribution test to see what kind of qualifications are good for him.
Chun In-beom, a former Lieutenant General of the ROK Special Forces, speaking to Arirang News on Tuesday. Arion, who is Jin and what's happening to him?
Yeah, so Jin, his full name is Kim Seok Jin. He is the oldest member of the boy band BTS, who are huge both in South Korea but also internationally. And this week he began his 5-week basic military training. He is the first member of the group to start this national service, which is compulsory for all men in South Korea. And he'll take his training course at a camp that's about 38 miles north of Seoul. And he's then set to be deployed to a frontline unit that's probably going to be near the North Korean border. And fans of BTS were urged to stay away from the military base, but unsurprisingly, many ignored those pleas, and so the entrance to this camp were absolutely lined with rabid fans just hoping for a glimpse of Jin as he entered the facility.
And there was some debate, wasn't there, in South Korea as to whether or not BTS should be granted an exemption from conscription.
Massive debate, yeah. Exemptions have actually been granted to other sports stars and entertainment people across the country, but it's always very controversial and it's difficult because, on the one hand, the country wants to make it clear that this is something that everybody does, and it can be damaging not only, at least as the country is concerned, for the country as a whole, but also for those individuals who have opted not to do the thing that all of their country people have had to do. So I think that, it was a really difficult question for BTS. Also, sheer numbers, in terms of the money that they bring into the country, it's an enormous amount of revenue in terms of tourism and also the sort of soft power that they project. So, to actually break apart this boy band and force them to do this military service was a really, really difficult thing that the country had to face.
Okay, we'll unpick some of that in a moment, but just first on the decision itself, Sorcha. So BTS make a lot of money for South Korea, but the laws are for everybody. That's a hard balancing act for the government, isn't it? What would you have decided if you were in charge of that decision? Would you conscribe him or not?
Well, I think I'm fundamentally opposed to the idea of compulsory conscription. So on that basis of alone, I think I'd have allowed them.
Then you wouldn't be serving in the South Korean government. Okay, but nonetheless, faced with this decision, do you make an exemption for these guys or not?
Well, I think actually in 2020, the government essentially has sort of made not an exemption, but they allowed them to delay their military service for a number of years. And the laws were passed really with them in mind, although it didn't specifically mention BTS, but it kind of allowed K-pop stars, which is now becoming this huge global export, to delay their military service for until they're 30 if they reach kind of a certain level of fame. And
so would you force him to go and serve or not?
No, I think they have done a lot for South Korea in terms of soft power. They've generated billions for their economy. They've raised their profile on the world stage massively. I think kind of South Korea is now being looked upon as a place that has a music industry that can compete with the US and the UK.
And that's reason to not do the service that every other young man has to do.
Look, I don't think you can serve your country in a number of ways. And I think probably military conscription should not be one of them. I think in terms of giving back, they've given back an awful lot. And these people who work, I mean, I'm not saying they work as hard as soldiers, but they work all hours of the day. K-pop stars' routines are famously grueling. And in fact, one of the reasons they originally gave for when they announced that they were planning to enlist and sort of give up their career for a few years was that they were so exhausted from the rigors of being a pop star.
Maybe they should have voluntary Maybe they should have conscription into BTS. Maybe young men could choose whether they want to be in a boy band or serving on the front line.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
exactly.
Leaf, this does throw a spotlight, doesn't it, on relationships between North and South Korea, I guess, for people who aren't in that country. What is that relationship like at the moment?
I would say it's bad. They're still technically at war. I've actually been to South Korea and drove quite close to the sort of demilitarized zone, the DMZ, where soldiers kind of look at each other menacingly. And South Korea is understandably very, very jumpy about the idea of having such a frightening, psychopathic, in my view, ruler right next to them. I'm quite struck by the history of kind of Korean pop stars and sort of the conscription. There was this famous kind of case in 2002 of a pop star called Yoo Seung-yoon. Probably that pronunciation wasn't dreamy.
Rather you than me. You did a good job.
who was a big star and talked up a good game, said he was going to do the military service like everyone else, and then at the kind of the 11th hour he became an American citizen to seemingly avoid the kind of call up, and then he was chucked out of the country. There was it completely ended his career. Everyone was outraged by it, and as much as I sort of sympathise with Sorcha's argument about how weird it is and sort of maybe not great to have conscription, I do think if you have the thing, you might as well do it properly. And just because they're pop stars doesn't mean that they shouldn't be involved. Also, it probably do them some good. Some of the kind of the sleeping arrangements are pretty grueling. There's 30 people in a room. One of my best friends is South Korean. Her brother was always anxious about having to do this period in the army. But it probably is quite good for cohesion, for the country as a whole, for relationships between different classes in Korea, which can be quite acute and difficult. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a perverse part of me that would quite like to see Mr. Glamorous BTS in some military fatigues scrubbing a floor somewhere.
And there was a quite funny moment just before he turned up to the camp where he's going to do his training, where he got his first buzz cut, and he posted a picture of it to social media saying that he felt he looked unexpectedly cute.
I can confirm he did.
It's true.
New motto for the South Korean army there.
Yeah, but actually the South Korean military used to have a celebrity sort of entertainment corps. So you could actually turn up and be one of those people who pretty much entertains the troops. But it was disbanded in 2013 after several members were caught leaving base without permission to visit an illegal massage parlor. So unfortunately, that avenue isn't actually open to Jin. There are ways that you can...
It's not exactly like his particular talent really works with him and an acoustic guitar either, is it? I mean, you need a lot of autotune and fireworks to put on a BTS concert.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about Elvis, don't you, when you think about a Western example for this? Obviously, it's been a long time since we've had conscription, but that did actually work well for his career. This could benefit BTS in the long run, couldn't it? People are talking about it as if it's an either or, the money they make for the South Korean government or serve in the army. But I mean, this could be the ultimate kind of way to really progress their careers from being teenage boy band heartthrobs to having an adult contemporary career.
I think so. And also military service has become a baked-in aspect of the way that K-pop continues to refresh itself. And interestingly, a lot of commentators have said that, part of the reason for BTS's success is that a lot of work was done by the people who preceded them in terms of making breakthroughs both nationally and internationally, but then they had to go and do their national service. And at that point, there was this sort of vacuum that was left for BTS to become the next big thing. And the idea is that this could be beneficial for BTS themselves, because they've already said that even though they're keen on pursuing solo individual careers, they'd like to get back together in 2025 after they've all done their service. But it could also be beneficial for other acts who are waiting in the wings to kind of get their moment in the spotlight. So it could actually work out.
Although Sorcha, 2025, I don't know what that is in boy band years, probably 15. It's a long time, isn't it? Do you think they can reform? Do you think they can be successful if they come back then?
I think absolutely. I think the thing about BTS is that they're not just, famous in South Korea. They're now famous across the world. They've got a huge following in the US. They've got a huge following in the UK. They've got huge followings in France. I think their fans will be waiting for them when they get back, really. Although, obviously, there is always the risk that people love the next new thing, the next hot thing. And yeah, I think unfortunately, maybe people will have forgotten about them by the time they return. But I think that's extremely unlikely.
Sound like you hold a candle a bit for BTS, Sorcha. Are you a fan?
No, I'm actually not a BTS fan at all.
And Leaf, it's not as if it's just Korea that has conscription, is it? I mean, it's useful, this story, to kind of remind us of that.
Yeah. Israel famously has conscription. And when I was in Israel, I was really amazed to see all these teenagers, there's so many teenagers in uniform all over the place. And one of the strange things about this is that South Korea is quite a, modern, progressive place by global standards. And yet it's a sort of male conscription. But you'd think that maybe even more liberal places would have totally mixed conscription. But in Denmark, for instance, conscription is mandatory for basically physically fit men, and women are allowed to participate, but they don't actually have to. So I think it's an interesting area, conscription, where old school views about what different kind of gendered people can do still kind of come out, basically.
Okay. Sorcha, you're up next after this. Okay, Sorcha, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week Leaf and I jump on the latest TikTok trend and give up our day jobs?
Day in my life as a stay-at-home girlfriend in Whistler. Start off the day with some skincare, of course. I've been loving my serums lately. My skin has finally been clearing up, which is actually a miracle. And then I take my morning juice shots. I've got my aloe, my ginger beet, and then my greens. Then I got my snowboard stuff all pulled out and ready to go. I put them in the dryer to warm them up because they were a bit cold. Then I made the bed.
A thrilling video insight there into TikTok star Kendall K's life. She released that on Tuesday and has already had over 1 million views. Sorcha, what is the story we're talking about here?
So-called stay-at-home girlfriends are becoming a growing trend on social media app TikTok, with videos like the one we just heard, promoting a lifestyle where young and often childless women choose to give up work and financially rely on their boyfriends. So this trend has been going on for some time and has been pretty widely criticized as anti-feminist and regressive. But I read a really interesting article by Eleanor Peake in The Eye this week, and she began to drill down into some of the reasons why young women might be choosing this lifestyle. And sort of behind the facade of what they're presenting as this perfect life, I think you can see a lot of struggling young women. Some had worked through the pandemic as nurses and NHS workers and were now totally burnt out. Others had experienced poor mental health. Some had been impacted by the war in Ukraine. And I just thought it was interesting to see how sort of this lifestyle wasn't necessarily a planned move, but a response to, I guess you could call, a moment of crisis for a lot of these women. And while I agree with a lot of the criticism that is leveled at this trend, I kind of wonder, can we really begrudge these women if they want to sort of opt out of modern life, if they have the opportunity to do so?
Well, is it opting out of modern life, Leaf, just to be in a relationship where one of you earns the money and the other doesn't? I mean, that's happened since time immemorial.
No, I would say it's a glorious return to the traditions of the past. I can really see the appeal of being able to use your nice boyfriend's money to fund your lifestyle, to spend your time drinking, aloe vera and beetroot shots, and like working out, so you've got a hot bod for him to come home to. But it's also, I do think it sheds light on, as Sorcha said, a kind of mental health crisis among millennials and Gen Z kind of women. I also think for me, it really opened up this another kind of trend that seems to be happening, which is that young mothers are having quite a difficult time getting back to work increasingly in the UK because of the high price of childcare, largely, and other factors too. And it's funny how these things can, unless you're really vigilant about protecting the gains that past generations of feminists have kind of made for women, we can slide back into old habits pretty quickly. And so, while on a micro level, no one's crying for especially that woman that we heard in the video. I think overall it's really depressing. And I'm one of these slightly sad people who thinks that work is a key part of life, and if you check out of it in the long term, the consequences are not good for you.
Except, Arion, the Kendall Kay, whose clip we played at the top, as I said, she's had over 1 million views of her messing about in Whistler on a mountain. She looks great. She has this kind of hypnotic voice. A lot of women obviously aspire to that lifestyle, whatever that says about feminism. And so actually it's a bit disingenuous, isn't it, for her to be like, I'm a stay-at-home girlfriend. Actually, her job is she's a TikTok influencer. And actually she's probably raking it in. And she's working pretty hard making those videos. I mean, that is work.
Absolutely. And even before she became the phenomenon that she has become due to having found this success as a stay-at-home girlfriend, she made the point that she was only able to do that not only because of the largesse that she was being offered by her boyfriend, but also because she had, trained as an architect, worked for years, and had her own personal savings behind her before she did all of this. So, I think that's question one. Is this a case of a person advocating only being subservient to your boyfriend? And I think that there certainly are people out there who are doing that, and they're using hashtags including things like submissive women, submissive wives, and trad wives, and that's all definitely part of this picture. But I think, especially in the case of Kendall Kay, I think that she is finding a different sort of career, and it's one that's based on becoming a social media personality. And that in itself is a different form of work to that many people might actually want. And I think even, speaking for myself, I have, I see what you're saying, Leaf, that there's a lot of virtue in having, work and reasons to get out of bed in the morning. But I think many people, particularly because of the pandemic, have found different ways that they can find meaning and also professional opportunities. And you can be either a social media or, in several people's cases who often appear on this show, including my own, a freelancer. And I think that that is a perfectly legitimate choice that a lot of people have made. Just one final point. I think a lot of the videos on TikTok that are being posted by these women with stay-at-home girlfriend as their hashtag are definitely tongue-in-cheek. I had a look at them, and a lot of them have these sort of Margaret Atwood overtones where they're taking the piss out of the whole notion that this is something aspirational. So I don't think it's something that we need to worry about generationally, that there's a whole generation of women coming up who all feel as though they need to be stay-at-home sort of wives.
Although the joke behind those parody videos, Sorcha, is the darkness of the boyfriend sort of leading in the background, right? That's the joke. I'll put on my face mask because Todd really likes this. And the dark joke is, and my boyfriend's controlling everything I do. Is that the thing that concerns you about this whole trend, really?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as Arion was just saying, lots of these young women who are making these videos, they are making loads of money and they are TikTok influencers, and they do have they absolutely do have a career. And the danger is they're promoting a lifestyle that is not really attainable or accessible for most people. So if you're a young girl and you're watching these TikToks and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, I'm going to do that. But actually you're not going to become a TikTok social media phenomenon who earns millions. And then what happens is that you're potentially stuck in a very financially precarious position, because lots of these women who are calling themselves stay-at-home girlfriend have their own money through their kind of social media influencing career, which I think is the really key part. I think I promote sort of getting into a situation where you don't have your access to your own money, don't have your own money, don't have your own career. I mean, I think it goes without saying why that could potentially be harmful and quite dangerous to lots of young women.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that is the crucial difference, isn't it, Leaf, between the stay-at-home girlfriend and the stay-at-home wife. I mean, obviously, if you're part of a marriage, then you've made a commitment to each other that your finances are jointly accessible. A lot of these stay-at-home girlfriends say that is the case. They effectively have a joint bank account with their boyfriends, but it's up to the boyfriend to say, actually, I'm dumping you and I'm going for someone else. They'd have nothing.
Yes, it's true that it does kind of make you a bit of a hostage to fortune, and I imagine it would be difficult in a job interview if you're asked, what have you been doing the past 3 years, and you say, well, I've been a stay-at-home girlfriend, because stay-at-home mothers, they have much more prestige. There's much more kind of societal understanding, I think, for when women who've been out of the workforce because of having children come back into it. I mean, there's obviously lots of difficulties that mothers returning to work face, but it's a sort of established type. We sort of know, she's been looking after the children, and now here she is back and she wants to work. So I don't think that a lot of these ex-girlfriends will find employment all that easy. I think one of the things about this story that it sort of opens up as well is this the kind of, there's been a bit of a revival of interest in a kind of old school type of feminism where women, and young women in particular, are reclaiming old gender roles. They're sort of saying, I don't want to go into STEM subjects. What I really like doing is baking cakes, and I want to be a caregiver. And I'm kind of both excited and depressed by this development. I can't really work out where I stand on it, but I think some of my most clever friends, that what they'd really like to do is like girlfriends. What they really like to do is just have some kids and have quite like a non-work orientated life. And I think that a feminism that doesn't really make room for those desires and those people, that sort of condemns them as traitors, is not a feminism that I think is working for a large portion of women. So I think it's an exciting time for feminism at the moment, if quite a scary one.
And also on that point, just the long undervaluation of household work that is, really problematic, continues to be problematic broadly in society. That we still do have this idea that if you're not actively working in a professional capacity, that you're not working. And, that ties into a statistic that I found about the fact that, according to a 2019 study, 45% of female breadwinners do the majority of household tasks, compared to just 12% of male breadwinners. So even when women are doing either even amounts of work with their partner or even more work than their partner, they're still doing more household work than their male significant other in those relationships where it's male and female. So I think that, that there's a lot of really complicated stuff around this question, and it's quite, it's challenging to unpick it all.
Leaf, Sorcha suggested that you and her might give up your day jobs. I'm just curious, if you weren't the assistant editor of The Week magazine, what would you be doing as a stay-at-home girlfriend? What would be your priority?
Oh, no, I think I'd be a great stay-at-home girlfriend, I've got to say. I mean, I love doing domestic things. Like, I like having baths. I like doing the odd bit of cleaning. I like baking. I would love, to go out for dinner all the time. I've always thought I'd be a very good, billionaire's wife, because I would give a lot of the money away. I would buy my friends flats. It would just be great. So unfortunately, my boyfriend hasn't yet suggested this, but I think I might send him this podcast and see what he thinks.
Interesting. I mean, given you're someone who's had a novel published, it's interesting that if you had the option to be at home, you would instead be having baths. Sorcha,
Yeah, much easier than writing novels, let me tell you.
Sorcha, what would you do if you were a stay-at-home girlfriend? What's the most enviable part of these videos you've been watching?
I would be horrendous because I cannot cook, cannot clean. So I'm already just would not, that I wouldn't be ticking a lot of boxes on that front. But
Can you do a sexy voiceover whilst you film yourself making a bed? Because that's half of it.
I endorse you, Sorcha. I think that's well within your capacities.
I think I just do a lot of yoga, go on some long walks, and just live the good life.
Arion, it would only seem fair to ask you the same question if you were a stay-at-home girlfriend. What would you do?
I'd enjoy my aloe, my ginger beets, and my greens.
Yeah, me too. I'm off to get my aloe. My thanks to Sorcha, Leaf, and Arion for their stories this week. Stay-at-home girlfriend or not, you can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcast. Just tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine. Perfect if you have hours to kill at home with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.